All right, theater management and production. I'm really excited about this class. I think that this is going to be a lot of fun, and B, I honestly think you all are going to enjoy this class. So here's the breakdown of it. Our goal with theater management and production is to learn how a theater operates, the business side of it. We will also get into probably a little bit of the personal business aspect too. So preparing you for those that want to go live as actors or lighting designers or scene designers, etc., etc. We'll talk a lot about the gig economy, budgeting, stuff like that. Now, don't let that scare you. This isn't just a math class, although we're going to look at probably the principles of stuff as opposed to there's not going to be accounting homework, so you don't have to worry about that. And you'll be learning it from somebody who has not only lived it, but who is not a math person either, per se. Essentially, for the first maybe quarter, half, kind of depends on when we get through stuff, we are going to learn the essence of what it means to operate a theater from season to season. What that means to employ people, what that means to pick shows, what that means for all these different scenarios. So you'll be looking at it from the perspective of, hey, I want to open a theater, run a theater. We may get into production on film a little bit, but so this is one area where like the principles may be the same, but the differences in the numbers are going to be very drastically different. May talk about that some regardless. But the first half, first quarter, maybe somewhere around in there, we're going to learn all this stuff. We're going to take like a big quiz, big idea over that, work on a big project-based what's the right word? Summative evaluation on that. Then we're going to turn it over to you for the second half, second 3 quarters, depending upon how much left is in the year. We will then turn your class into a production company of sorts, a theater company, and you will each divvy up roles and responsibilities. I'm talking about roles like producer, box office manager, if we go a board of director route, whatever way we decide ultimately to go. You will divvy that up during class predominantly. I will have some input on that. And then I'll give you a certain amount of money out of the theater budget that we have at the school. And it'll be your job as a class to produce something. Now, what that something is, well, that's going to be determined by the people that are chosen or that you elect to be in certain positions in the class. So at that point during the year, it becomes a totally student-driven work. And then at the end, we're going to tally it up. We're going to find out if you lost money, if you gained money, if you broke even. By what metric we determine your success will be, up to you all as a class too, but we'll look at to see how it goes. In the theatrical world, sometimes losing money's not always, that's par for the course on occasion. So, I know that's a little complicated, but that's like the essence of what this class is. We're going to kick things off real fast in the beginning about learning about stuff, and then we're going to try to get through that as soon as possible so that we can really hit the ground running on making your own production. Now, this class, there are some students that have been into it that haven't really had a theater class before. That's okay, because, as we've said in the past, theater's the Isle of Misfits for a reason. Now, I'm not calling those kids misfits, but they know you all from one way or the other, so, take that for what it's worth. But in essence, people come into the theater for lots of different reasons at lots of different times, and there's people, you got to play to people's strengths on a constant basis, right? Like, you got to find out what people are good at. A lot of you know each other. There's going to be some people in here that you don't know as well. So we're going to incorporate everybody into this project so that we all have a chance to participate in one form or fashion. So that's the essence of what this class is and what we're going to do, and we're going to kick it off right at the bat and try to get through as much stuff as possible over this NTI. And who knows, maybe we can be in a position that we can get the ball rolling on the production side soon. Organizational structure. This is so interesting to me that we get this flow chart. Now, some of this may look familiar to you because we tried to mimic this in a certain respects for Drama Club last year. And I think it was a little premature for me to do that. I probably should have waited a year and figured out how Drama Club operated before I really jumped into the mix and doing it. But nevertheless, I'm going to talk about it for a little bit. So let's look at this first organizational chart. This at the top is the board of directors. Below the board of directors, you have the executive director, then your artistic director. So in flow charts, you'll see lines that are drawn between the different things, and sometimes they'll branch off into different paths. Essentially, this is a flow chart of hierarchy. Who's in charge of who, right? Werner Herzog, who's a very interesting film director, often says that film is the last place where it's acceptable to have a dictator. I think theater is like that too in some respects. I really do think theater's like that. There is a hierarchy to it. Now, whether or not you are a dictator at the top who is demonstrative and telling everybody what they need to do, or you're more relaxed and gives power to the people under you, that's a style of leadership, and we'll talk about styles of leadership some later on. But essentially, the higher up you are on the ladder, the more decisions you're making, right? And it's your choice, right? You can't have a company manager that can make decisions that will override the executive director. It does not happen. And you'll notice that you could essentially break this off into areas, and it's not necessarily about importance, but you can start grouping them together underneath there, so that when we get down to the bottom, when you look at prop shop supervisor and master electrician, essentially they're just in charge of their stuff, and that's what their focus is on. And we'll talk about more about that area. It doesn't mean that one's boss of the other. They collaborate a lot, but that's also a little different because those people are usually hired in later. So, board of directors. What kind of thing would have a board of directors? I mean, really, a lot of nonprofit theater has board of directors. Even for-profit theater will have a board of directors in some cases at the top that are making decisions, overall big decisions for the direction of we're going to call it the theater production. The overall could be a theater troupe, could be a theater company, could be just the theater itself, and its whole job is renting out the space to other people. So the board of directors are making the big decisions. They're determining the overall budget. They're setting goals. They are hiring and firing the people underneath. They are the bigwigs. Sometimes they may not even come from a theatrical world. They may be people that you nominate for that position, leaders in the community, something like that. So we'll look at that a little bit, how that determined and what their roles and responsibilities are a little later, but essentially they're the ones at the top. Underneath them is the artistic director and then the executive director. They share some responsibilities, but essentially, an executive director is, I think it's safe to say that they're the business side of the theater, and they're really they're dealing with the day-to-day operations, the long-term operations, that kind of thing. The overall direction of the theater, making sure that the trains run on time. The artistic director is in charge of the artistic expression of the theater, what shows they're doing, overseeing the director a little bit of the different shows, theatrical performances. So getting back to the organizational structure of a theater, one thing you got to remember is that this structure is set up not just for the short term, but it in fact needs to be able to be carried through no matter what production that you choose, and for multiple productions. So when you get into an individual play, you can look at some of these graphs and see how they lend themselves to specific things, right? So this first graph that we were looking at with the board of directors up top, artistic director and executive director under them, and then the following tiers below them, really is a good format for long-term sustainability of a theatrical company, of a theatrical production house. If you think of like here's some examples. So like the Henderson Area Arts Alliance, they're not producing plays. Their structure is about it follows similar things, but see, their executive director underneath the board of directors really makes decisions on what plays to bring in. It is not about producing plays or productions. Locally, I think that if you look in Owensboro, the Theater Workshop of Owensboro, which is intended as a community theater organization that is working on producing a season every year, is structured very similar to this, in that they have a board of directors that governs them and then an executive director under that. Now, I don't think they have an artistic director, or they may even call it a creative director. But that person, I think, predominantly, I think in their structure, it's predominantly an executive director with people going underneath that. So when you look at your production manager, sometimes that position is canceled out, and the executive director or artistic director will take on those responsibilities. And for instance, the resident director there, they have people like at the Theater Workshop of Owensboro in specific that will do multiple shows over time. But see, I've directed there. And so in that situation, I wasn't a resident director. I was like a guest director that came in for a production. And I think I did that pretty soon after I did the Audubon play in Henderson. But see, if you'll notice under there, you have the stage manager, the technical director, and all the subsequent groups underneath that were already established with the organization, and they were just assigned to my play. So in that situation, the only name that changed from production to production in this case was mine, and then everybody else filled in the normal roles that they have. I may need to consult Rachel Ivy, but I would imagine that the Civic Theater organization works in a very similar way, with an executive director up at the top, an artistic director working in tandem with them. I think ideally the distinction between an artistic director and an executive director is that an executive director is in charge of steering the ship long term, but predominantly hyper focused on the business aspect. And that's anything from making sure that the box office runs correctly to fundraising goals and seeing if those things happen the way they should. The artistic director really should be in charge of creating the season. Now, obviously, when you're talking about a hierarchy of this, the top always gets the final say, right? So the board of directors will always give the final stamp of approval on whatever season you pick, or whatever individual shows that you are doing or producing. But the artistic director should be in charge of maintaining the artistic integrity of the season. So let's take a break for a second and talk about what that means.
So big picture, I'm picking shows. And we're going to go off on a couple tangents to illustrate some points here. What shows to pick and why pick them? So let's first think about a film production company. Now, film production company obviously are dealing with bigger budgets, and I'm talking like Paramount or DreamWorks or any of these Disney, Pixar, that kind of thing. Back in the day, probably from the late 70s, really on to definitely the 90s and the early 2000s, and arguably today, although it gets weirder the more late 2010 you get, what you would often hear are your people will talk about their summer blockbusters. The old term for this was tentpole movies. So a studio had X amount of money that they had, and we could be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to spend to produce movies. So they would bet all their cards and most of their cards on a big picture movie over the summer. So this would be like, this is definitely any Marvel movie for the past 10 years. But it's things like Independence Day or a Steven Spielberg film or any number of commercial endeavors. The goal is, the thinking is that you need to put money into these projects because these projects will give you a good return on your investment, what business people call ROI, return on investment. Basically, it's like if you have $100 and you want to put $100 and invest it in something, you want a return on that in plus 100. So if you give somebody a loan for $100 and say, hey, you can pay me back in a month or 2 weeks or whatever, you want to see $110, $115, $120. That becomes your rate of investment, return on your investment, that amount of money that you make on top of it. And ideally, you do that enough. You talk about bigger numbers. If you put in $100 million into a couple movies and you see $125 million, well, you just made $25 million or $15 million or whatever it is. So the other side of this equation is that movie production companies will say, well, we have X amount of money. We're going to put 30, 40% on one movie. The rest of that money, we are going to spread it out over other films. So we're going to produce, our goal at the end of our season, fiscal year is what they would call it. In the theatrical world, we'd call it a season, is that we want to make a lot of money from this show. The other shows, we're not going to put as much into it because they may not need the budget. They may be minimalist. They may have less people involved. But we're going to do those shows because for artistic integrity reasons, because we think it's a good show for certain people to see. We just think that this show represents who we are as an organization. It isn't necessarily about the money and trying to recoup every cent that you put into it. So the idea is that when you start looking at it either through a fiscal year or in a fiscal year basically is the time of which you operate and do taxes over the course of 1 year. And what that gets into is when you get down 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, you want to look at each fiscal year and see improvement. You want to see growth in your company or business or industry. It's the same basic principle that you're applying here. And season is the same way. Seasons, though, don't usually run. They usually go from, they start in the fall, and then lead to the next summer where they take time off in between. You can't saturate a market, which is a whole nother topic of conversation. But essentially you pick shows and you say, okay, this show we know is a show that we think we're going to have a large audience for, but we are going to also invest in this other show because of its artistic integrity or for whatever reason. So for instance, if you look at our stuff over this year, this is what the 2020-2021 Henderson County High School SOFA theater season looks like. We've canceled the fall play. We've moved the musical to the summer. We've added the radio drama in the fall and the film. And then we're keeping the date at the Fine Arts Center for the Christmas play. And then in the spring, we're looking at a spring play, Curious Incident of the Dog at the Nighttime, which will end us at the summertime. And really, this class's production will fall somewhere in that time frame. And then over the summer, we'll switch over to do the musical. So, for those shows that we're looking at for 2020, 2021, the radio drama, I don't anticipate it making us much money. I don't think that it will, in the end, be something that we can make any money on in the end. And in fact, we'd probably be lucky to break even. We'll probably lose money on that. The larger purpose, though, is that it gives you an opportunity. There's a couple of larger purposes. One, it gives you a safe platform to perform. Two, it gives you it gives us publicity, which is it gets us out there to a wider audience than just what can be in the seats. And forming that relationship with WSON long term could prove fruitful for other things that we want to promote in the future, especially if the show itself, aside from the drama would be part of the show, so the show itself can go maybe longer into the future. The film is a big question mark. Could we make money off of that? Yeah, it's a different business model than selling seats, predominantly, because we will premiere it somewhere, like at the the local cinema. And we can make money off of those seat tickets that are sold. Probably in the end, it'll be negligible, and depending upon how long they allow us, they allow us to have it. Next factor in that is if we sell DVDs of the show. We could give them to the cast, but we could, allow us to sell them to the cast for a nominal profit. And then the rest of it we could sell for a larger profit margin. And we'll break down how that profit margin works out later. The Christmas show is a different story. That show is, quite frankly, not about artistic integrity. Now, that doesn't say, I'm not trying to imply that we're going to pick a show that we don't believe in. That's not the point, or something that doesn't have artistic value. But what I'm saying is that show's about putting butts in the seat. It's about selling as many tickets as possible. That's why it's a Christmas show. It's not really about, it may have a good message, but it's not about the message. It's about selling seats and allowing people to see the work that we're doing. It's what in cinema they would call first cinema. It is commercial, 100%. It is commercial. In fact, this is going to be our main fundraising source if we were going to go on our SOFA trip this year, which has been indefinitely put on hold right now because of COVID. But this was going to be a way, in theory, that we could make a substantial amount of money from one production. Whether or not that still happens that way, who knows? But and what's going to happen to that money other than putting it into our account, I don't know. But we can figure that out later on if we're even going to be allowed to do it. But that's definitely a show we pick for commercial reasons. And then you get around to the spring. And I'm kind of, this class's project. This class's project is not. Yes, you are going to look at this and you're going to try to say, I want to make some money for the course, but that's not really the purpose, right? It's more about the learning experience. It's more about collaborating with each other, working on a big project from start to finish. I mean, that's what it is about. So in that term, it's not about making money or making even the money that we give, the budget that we give to you back. That's not the number one goal of the course. Arguably, aside from the clear and present educational benefits, it is about artistic integrity. Your artistic voice is, another whole side of the equation that we want to make sure that we're doing something that you all can be proud of as artists. And on that note, then you have the spring play. The spring play, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, does it have commercial appeal? Yeah, I think we could spin a story that has commercial appeal and we can have people come in. But this is, we're going to put, whether or not we make our money back on this is irrelevant, because its whole goal is all about the artistic integrity of the piece. It's a challenging piece. It's something that, public schools don't often do. This is what performing arts schools do. So, damn it, we're going to be like a performing arts school in the choices that we make for productions. And it's a beautiful story, and it clicks all the right boxes in terms of why you want to do this piece and tell this story. It's a contemporary piece. It's not, parents should enjoy it, but your peers should enjoy it too. I mean, it's much deeper than superficial comedies or any other type of show that we've done in the past. The Mousetrap, when we did that last year, I chose it for, it's a special play. That show has a special place in theatrical history because of its long run on the West End. And people know that show, and it's a fun show, but it's a good show all around. I think that was probably more commercial than, artistic integrity. It was a show I liked too, and I had seen the professional version of it, so we could, borrow ideas from that, pay homage to it, I should say. And it's something that we should be proud of, and we got good reviews for that, and we made quite a bit of money from that show. We made our money back, including the cast party that we had. So, I mean, that was a worthwhile show in the end. It was a success all around. The Addams Family we didn't get to do, but that was definitely a commercial show. The goal was to have people come see it and do it. And okay, I need to check that email. So I'm gonna I'll wait a second. So, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is about artistic integrity, without a doubt. Does it have commercial appeal? Yeah, I don't think you're always sacrificing one for the other. Sometimes you have to, but other times it works on a spectrum. And then when you get into the musical again, we're not even thinking about what that show is yet. Arguably, we probably should. And we've talked about it. I don't want to say we're not thinking about it, but we've talked about it, and but not enough to make any sort of determination. So the key is when you're running your own theater company, it's balancing the needs of getting people there and balancing that with creating art. And sometimes art isn't for everybody. I know there's plays I've had you all read that mean something to me but mean nothing to you because you don't care. You haven't experienced this in your life yet. You're too young to get it, or whatever, and vice versa. There'll be stuff that you all point to and say, oh, this means a lot to me, but I can't really understand it because I'm too old, or whatever the case. So your artistic director, back to this idea, is choosing a season that fulfills some sort of goal. That goal is to promote the theater, grow that theater. It is to establish your artistic credibility while also maintaining commercial credibility. And you can see a give or take and balance with that, And then when you look at the comparisons between, going back to the Mousetrap versus Addams Family. Addams Family materials and royalties cost somewhere in the ballpark of $2,000, $2,500. The Mousetrap was $600. So already you're starting to see that the cost of certain shows are different based on knowing their commercial appeal. Disney shows are extremely, notoriously expensive, and that's because they know that once you say I'm doing The Little Mermaid or Lion King or whatever the show is, Moana, people are going to want to come see it, and you can charge $25, $30 a ticket. And that's that, speaking of the ticket price, is something that the executive director looks at. How many people can we expect to come see this show? Let's estimate. How many tickets do we need to sell to break even on this show? How many tickets do we need to sell to turn a profit? And so And we'll look more about what breaking even, turning a profit, gross and net gains are later on. But this is essentially the question of picking a season. And yeah, it gets into debate, and there's some nuance, but this is the big picture. How do you pick a season that represents you as a company and your message and your theme and where you're going as an organization? And that's the debate. That's the vision that the artistic director tries to instill. Under the artistic director, executive director, you got production manager, resident director, company manager, business manager, marketing director. So your business manager and marketing director answer typically to the executive director. The marketing obviously would have some sort, he would collaborate with the artistic director after he or she determines the vision for the season that they are producing. The business manager, the marketing director under them is public relations, telemarketing, promotions. So this is promotions, obviously, are promoting the show. That's collaborating with, Facebook, social media type of thing. Telemarketing is either, literally calling out to different places or receiving calls, questions and answers, that type of thing. Public relations, that is anywhere from writing publicity notices to making sure the public is aware of your season. So they all work underneath the marketing director. The business manager under them is payroll, accounting, head usher, box office treasurer. So you'll see accounting and payroll work very close to each other. Accounting and payroll. Accounting is literally the money person, looking at dollars and cents, what's coming in, what's going out. The business manager oversees that, as well as the payroll. Payroll is literally anything to do with paying people in the production, whether they are on contract like a teacher's salary. They are on a set salary for the year, which some places do that, or if they're brought in for just periods of time, like an independent contractor. Those are different scenarios of which they pay a person. Essentially, as like an independent contractor, so like. For instance, they can hire me, AJ Casey, to come in and work on a show in Owensboro or Evansville, and they can pay me on a monthly basis or a weekly basis. When you get to a certain number, then you start talking about what you need to do for your tax obligations, and that changes the equation somewhat. The flip side to that is that if they don't hire AJ Casey, the person, they can hire AJ Casey, the business. Now, the business, they would write a solid check. So if I was producing a show over at 2, which I could in theory direct, they could write me a larger check for my production services and have my company do it. Now, then when you're talking about the tax obligation, that's my company's responsibility to pay. So based on what they send to me and what my yearly, gross and net income is how I would figure that part of the equation out. So in theory, as a business, I can travel around from location to location, securing job after job of directing or producing a play. So box office treasurer is the person that is, literally in charge of the day the shows are running. We usually operate shows. Well, I say usually, but I think Mousetrap was one weekend. Addams Family, we were looking at 2 weekends. And that's fairly common for most theaters, is to do weekend performances. Sometimes they run for longer than just one weekend, obviously, and in fact you have to in some certain. If you're in a larger market with more people that you can fit, you're going to want to run it multiple weekends to try to ensure A, that as many people as come, and B, they have the ability to come, and B, that you try to capture the most amount of people as possible to your show, because in the end that means more money for your company and production. The head usher is the person that is in charge that night of making sure everybody is where they need to be in terms of the money and the patrons and the seats and that kind of thing. Let's jump over to, so production manager, resident director area, and company manager. We're going to disregard the company manager. The company manager I've usually heard, I'll get you better information on this, but the company manager is usually another advocate for the actors, especially if you're talking about a troupe coming in to do a show. They work in consultation with the director, but I don't know if they're necessarily a creative force. Usually that's up to the director. Okay, we're going to pause on the director and come back to that. So the production manager. So the production manager is usually the liaison between the executive director and artistic director and the director. The director's responsibility is imparting his vision onto the show. The production manager is the person who, in consultation with the director, is making sure that the budget is on target, that everybody under them are doing what they need to do and getting paid and all that kind of jazz. If there's pay problems or anything like that, usually go to the production manager first to make sure that, let's say you underestimated or overestimated your budget. I got an extra $1,000 or need an extra $1,000. That will be the production manager who's in charge of figuring all that out and moving it around in consultation with the director. So so this is where it gets kind of interesting. Underneath, you'll see this little weird graph under the director. All these things are under the purview of him. You have the technical director on one side. That's like Drew Willett for the theater kids, even though she's not here. I don't think she's in, maybe she is in this class. I don't know. School hasn't started yet technically, so cut me some break. But the technical director, the house crew is like the stagehands. So obviously the technical director is over them, making sure that they know what they do. But so is the stage manager is over that person too, the house crew, which I don't know why the stage management is over on the left or on the right side of that graph under the director without any real line to the house crew. I would almost add a line there myself. And then you have under the technical director, you have the scene shop supervisor. That is the person who's building the sets. Costume shop supervisor is obviously the person who is overseeing the costume choices. Prop master electrician has to do with the lighting. Chief sound technician is the person in charge of sound. So like on our show, we may very well, on some of our shows, we may have different jobs for each of these people. And in a place like us at the high school, we share a lot of responsibilities. You'll find this in bigger productions too. You may be in charge of more than one area. You may only be in charge of one area because those are your strengths. It just kind of depends. The technical director is the person that's overseeing all those things. And so like in Drew's case, Drew is also the chief sound technician. So Drew is double duty. So she's like overseeing herself in some ways. And that makes things difficult. I usually hate doing that because, as a sound technician during the show, she needs to be on top of her game for the sound, not worried about everybody else. That's why the technical director during the rehearsal process is making sure everybody is living up to their end of the bargain, from props to lighting to costumes, etc. So the resident designers, I think that's in the same ballpark as that stuff below. So the stage management is under the director but over the actors, and the actors also go to the director. So the director obviously directs the show. He collaborates with everybody. It's his job, his or her job, to impart his or her vision on the production. The stage manager is, during this whole process, is running the show already. They start and stop rehearsals. They call breaks. They do that kind of thing. They are also in charge of taking notes and doing things like that during the production, because the goal of them is, by the time the show starts, is that it's their show. The director's done opening night. He doesn't do anything because the show's done. The show is finished. You don't need the director. He or she may give a uplifting speech at the beginning, which I am well known for. But other than that, they shouldn't have to do anything. It should be the stage manager's responsibility. If the director did his or her job, to be able to, the stage manager should run the show. So on our booth, you'll see that we have 3 people back in the booth from here on out. It'll be the stage manager calling the show. And we had this set up for the Addams Family, although obviously it didn't come to fruition. You have your sound designer, your sound engineer on the sound, and then your light, which was Drew, and then lighting designer, lighting technician on the lights, which was Heath, and then Sam was going to call the show. We had multiple stage managers, and they worked closely together. So for Addams Family, Dawn was backstage. So she was definitely a stage manager, but she was also like the head stagehand. She would oversee everything that was going on backstage. Emmy was stationed on the Don was stage left, Emmy was stage right, and essentially the idea was that they could handle both sides of it. Now for our show, Reagan would probably be somewhere back there too, to offer another hand, and then whoever else we needed at the time, because Reagan was the assistant or the student director. So, but that varies, right? Like if your show's ready to go and it runs like clockwork by the time Tech Week starts, or by mid Tech Week, right before the show starts, you shouldn't have to worry about anything for the rest of the production. So if you look at the other graphs, they're very similar, and peruse these to get an idea of how it works. But the general idea is that no matter what, and the one with the producer at the top, general manager on the side, director on the other side, is an interesting graph because that may be more familiar with what we do in the theater here at the local level, and actually is very similar, I would imagine, to film sets. It's very similar. So, in the end, your stage order is set so that there's a clear hierarchy for people to know who they answer to, and also for the people that they're answered to, what are they answering to? The director is in service of the production, but also in service of his producer or the board of directors, the artistic and creative director that has hired him, him or her. He or she has to have the vision to do the play, but also in service of the goal, whatever that goal may be. So like by the time we get around to doing like the Christmas show, the director will be in service of putting on an entertaining show, whatever one we decide to do. And then ideally, we're bringing in enough people that we can not only break even, but make a profit off of that show for things that we want to do in the future. So that part of the equation, in terms of the organizational structure, is about knowing your roles and responsibilities and then accomplishing those roles and responsibilities. Now we'll dive into some of this more specific things later, because obviously it gets way more complicated than this, but this is like the big picture overarching ideology behind the structure of these type of productions. Like, I know this is a lot, and I know that most of you all may know some of these things, and I know I've talked about them with you before, but it's good to have an idea and that flow chart to reference it and see. Now remember, this flow chart can be fluid at times. You can't have more than one job. You can't have more than one responsibility. And usually for like community theater work, you see that a lot. Independent film, you see that too. It really just depends upon what your resources are, and then capitalizing on your set of skills, expertise, and the resources that you have. So those are all part of the equation.